Hey guys, you know what time it is. Before the start of the episode today, I'm going to talk about the gentleman's pick of the week. And today, because we're talking about Rolex, hello, we're back in another Rolex on bobswatches.com. And this time it's the Rolex Datejust Tuxedo Index Dial. If you look at the dial, actually, this is the first time I've ever seen a Rolex like this, a tuxedo dial Rolex. So smooth bezel, first of all, really nice. The two-tone Rolex with the tuxedo dial, as I said, it's really gorgeous. The gray, the darker gray and the lighter gray combined with the silver and gold, really lovely. It's priced at 6.2K and it's at 36 millimeters it's sitting at 36 millimeters and it comes with a 31-35 automatic movement, 18 karat yellow gold, and it comes with a certificate of authenticity and warranty card from Bob's Watches, obviously. And if it's not satisfied, once again, if it's not 100% satisfied, return watch in 3 days for a full refund. So go check it out, guys. Link in bio. If you visit gentlemanpursuits.com or visit Instagram, there's going to be a link in bio as well. Click the link, go check it out. You don't want to miss out this deal because it's a one-off thing. So go check it out, guys. Roll the clip. Hey, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Gentleman Pursuits podcast. My name's Ryan. Hope you're doing great. Please ignore how I look. If you're watching the video, just woke up. It's still early and it's really dark outside for some reason. It's really cloudy, really foggy today in Vancouver. So it's not necessarily like a sunny, happy day. Woke up feeling a little cloudy, I'd say. Sometimes, you wake up, it feels like you don't have that, morning clarity, and this is exactly where I'm at right now. And today, the week before, I talked about vintage watch collecting, okay, which is something that I'm new to. And then afterwards, I did more research. I had a conversation with people, and I learned more and more about vintage watch collecting because it's a like, you have to agree with me that vintage watch collecting is a really deep realm of knowledge, right? It has a lot of various things you have to know, you have to learn, and the only way to get better is to learn as you go. So, before jumping into today's topic, just, a quick recap of, my week, let you know what I did. And also, I hope you guys had a great week, and I hope this week ahead of you is going to be the best one ever. So, last week, just school, and also, just a quick announcement that this month is there's going to be a lot of different interviews lined up for the podcast. So there are going to be more people coming onto the podcast talking about watches and whiskeys. And there's just one special guest coming onto the podcast next week, actually 2 days later, like Tuesday, talking about we're going to chat about watches, and I hope that's going to be a really interesting episode for you guys, because I really am looking forward to that interview. So after doing that interview, I'm gonna make an announcement saying who that person is, and just promote it, because I hope that was gonna be a big one. So, and then I have 2 more whiskey related interview lined up as well, and I hope that's gonna, I hope that I can learn more from the conversation with those 2 gentlemen. And also, for those who are listening to it, if you're here for the watch content and you want to get into whiskey, I hope those 2 episodes is gonna help you have a better understanding on what whiskey is and how to get into it, like what to look out for, blah blah, something like that. Okay, back to today's topic. So last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, I talked about vintage watches, and that kind of sparked something in me to do more research and read more about, not like actively looking, but at least whenever I have the chance to read about it, I would go to forums, Google it, just scroll and see what I can attain, what knowledge I can attain. Okay, so Greg, which is I personally view him as a like a mentor. It's not an official mentor mentee relationship, but because he is so well versed in the vintage watch collecting world, a lot of the things he said, I just I find it really credible. So he told me that vintage watch collecting and vintage Rolex collecting. Oh, by the way, Greg his Instagram handle is Livingston at Night. He has a really amazing vintage watch page that you should check it out. So Greg told me that vintage watch collecting and vintage Rolex collecting is a two different thing. So back then, so like 2 weeks ago, I didn't actually understand what that meant because I never actually thought about it that way. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And he told me more about it, and then I did more research on vintage Rolex and vintage watch collecting, and I start to see the difference in two worlds, like the difference between two worlds. One of the main difference is that it ultimately comes down to a few like main categories. First of all, the brand itself, right? Let's say vintage Tag Heuer, vintage Rolex, vintage Omega, vintage Rolex, right? The brand itself, their history, and the collector, that and how their fans or diehard like fanatics, how they view these brands and what fuel them to want to buy these vintage watches. And then lastly, I think it's rarity, right? So I was like, okay, in order for me to actually understand this topic, I have to do extensive research on this one particular brand, which is Rolex. And back then I thought Rolex is just a really luxurious brand, right? It's like a brand that everyone wants. Everyone's first watch has to be a Rolex. I was like, okay, there's not like a much about this brand that could possibly make vintage Rolex collecting such a different thing. And the more I look into it, the more question I have. And also just really I admire Rolex way more, but also just scared of it in a certain way. And I'll get to that. So yesterday I literally was just reading about it all day, and I posted an Instagram story saying how the watch world is deeper than I have ever anticipated, which is true. Like yesterday I had like such a huge epiphany that I was like, damn, this is crazy, man. Like the more I look into it, the more I know how much that I don't know. And then Andrew from Instagram, his Instagram handle is Bit by the Watch Bug. He was like, man, you just gotta learn, as you go. There's no like right way to gauge this topic. And I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to like do an episode on Rolex anymore because it's like too much information to actually compile. He was like, hey, like why you don't have to know everything to make one episode. You can make one episode as you like make an episode as you learn. So it's like a journey, like a journal for you as your like learning process, like a research paper, right? He said like a research paper. And I was like, that is so brilliant. So first of all, thank you, Andrew, for the idea. So this is gonna be the first journal entry of my journey to find the answer to why Rolex is Rolex. So here's a few things that I've learned about Rolex. Is that it is crazy how a brand can go from one of the most reliable to people thinking that I am going to look rich if I buy this, which is a really I'd say kind of modern day idea to think that I'm going to look rich when I buy this. Maybe other brands like maybe AP, maybe Patek Philippe, they have the same. Maybe some people have the same feelings with those brands too. But I'd say the most sought after watch to give them that satisfaction is actually Rolex. And second thing I noticed that about Rolex is that it is timeless. Rolex is timeless from day one to now. Their designs have not changed a bit. Like, I mean, they have changed, but like, it's not like they put out new models every year, right? Rolex is not, they do not chase trends. They are a trendsetter. They made a few watches and they're like, this is it. This is what we are going to make for the rest of our lives. So, like it or hate it, this is what we're gonna give you. But because their production value is so high, right? 904L steel, their chronograph movements, right? Everything's so high, like great quality. People wouldn't actually be able to complain about it. Maybe the only thing they can complain about is their design. And I'm sure a lot of people think that Rolex is really lazy, including me sometimes. I feel like I bitch and moan about Rolex being lazy and being not innovative. But the more I learn about the brand, I understand why they wouldn't do it. I feel like if they actually do it, it will compromise the whole brand's image. And the one big factor, as I do my research, one big factor contributing to why, and I mean another big factor contributing to why Rolex is such a popular watch brand is because early on in their brand's career, they had a lot of different marketing strategies, right? They have a lot of ads. They have a lot of, I'd say, sponsorship for movies, for athletes, right? It can be seen everywhere. Once, like, if there's a world record that's being broken, you can assume that that athlete or that person is wearing a Rolex because it's reliable, because it's sturdy. That's why it can withstand a lot of pressure under these like world record breaking environment, right? So Rolex is always with world records and movies, right? Paul Newman. Paul Newman's a race car driver and also a movie star, and then Paul Newman Daytona. And world leaders. I feel like world leaders is such an important aspect in contributing to why Rolex became such a big brand. Because Winston Churchill, Fidel Castro, right? They all wear Rolexes. Maybe the Queen of England, she wears Rolex too. Why? Maybe there's not actually like that much of thought put into why they chose Rolex when they first got it, but because all these world leaders, or at least prominent figures throughout history, a lot of the time they can be seen to be wearing a Rolex. Even Fidel Castro, right? Wearing a GMT Master. It is easy to, associate that watch with the power of the person that's wearing it. Queen of England. Oh, she's wearing a Rolex. Damn, like, only powerful people wear Rolexes. Only people, like a revolution leader who is trying to influence the society, trying to change the world, wears Rolex. So Rolex must be the symbol of power and symbol of wealth. And therefore, combining all these with movie stars, athletes, world record, and all these crazy stuff, it is really easy for a consumer to, from the outside view, just look at Rolex and be like, whoa, Rolex is something else. Why do all these great people wear Rolex? There must be something special about Rolex. That's why I want to wear it, right? And now, that's why they want to wear it. And now I want to wear it because I want to be powerful. I want to be viewed as the same, I'm on the same level. And that is, and that got me thinking, okay? That got me thinking. It is not a fact, it's just my opinion, right? Back then, it's undoubtedly that Rolex did a lot of marketing. Intentionally, unintentionally, they benefited a lot from marketing. Nowadays, I would say there are way less marketing done by Rolex because they are a brand that do not require a lot of marketing. Their greatest form of marketing is word of mouth, right? Older generation passing down a Rolex to their children, right? And they'd be like, oh my God, this is my first watch. And my mom said that this Rolex is really expensive, blah, blah, blah. They worked so hard to get it, right? You know, they kind of instilled the idea into the next generation. So I feel like, because in a lot of the episodes, sometimes I would say, man, why do people only focus on Rolexes? Like, there are so many other brands out there that are doing what Rolex are doing, or sometimes maybe even better, with better design, better movements, better wear. It fits better on your wrist. But why Rolex? Why are you buying for that crown? It's just a crown. It's just a name, right? Why are you still so obsessed with that? And partly because of what the previous generation told them. Instead of Rolex's marketing, because Rolex's marketing were so prominent back then, like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, to the 70s maybe, they can be seen everywhere. And now it's more of a generational thing they pass down. So I feel like that is true because nowadays more and more people are giving other brands a chance because they are kind of coming out of the shroud of Rolex and saw that, oh wow, Longines are doing something really nice as well. Oh wow, Oris, damn, Big Crown Pointed Date. I gotta mention Big Crown Pointed Date because it's one of my favorite watch. Oris Big Crown Pointed Date is actually pretty nice. Cartier, damn, they're like doing something really nice as well. Like I just realized that. So it's just an opinion, obviously. So now, because of less marketing from Rolex and more people are snapping out of it, there are more of like a balance can be seen. Like finally not everyone's obsessed with Rolex. And here's another thing. This turns into another topic. Okay, so because there are more people seeing that, oh, everyone's having that Daytona, let's you know what, now I know that it's not only Rolex that makes Daytona or chronographs. Zenith makes El Primero, because now I know more about Zenith because of the less of the shroud thing I said. Now I know more about Zenith, and I learned about El Primero, and I learned about oh, El Primero actually was once the movement inside of Daytona. Now I have more admiration for Zenith. And when people come together, you know, sometimes for watch, like I'd say assholes, okay, for assholes, a lot of the time they would blatantly tell you that I have something that you don't have because I want to make you feel like shit, right? I want to make you feel like shit. Even you have a Daytona. Everyone has that Daytona, like black and white. Come on, man, you can buy that everywhere. Like, be on a wait list for 2 to 3 years, you can get it. But I have this one chronograph from this one brand that you don't have. Like, think about that. Now, because of the idea of internet and Instagram, of social media, people are more exposed to what other people have. Instead of like before, when you see a Datejust, you're gonna be like, oh my God, that's a Datejust. That I want to have that Datejust. That's so rare. It's so rare to see someone wearing it, because let's say around your neighborhood there's only like 1 or 2 people that can actually afford it. So you see a Datejust, like, oh my God, it's so rare. And now, in the age of internet and the age of Instagram, you can see how everyone around the world has a platinum Rolex. This person has a Roman numeral Datejust. This person over here has a Daytona, a Paul Newman Daytona. Everyone is flexing something that is not normal. Everyone's flexing something that you don't have. So this kind of feud into why vintage Rolex watches is such a big thing now. But vintage Rolex is it's a really big thing. One thing is what I said. I suspect that is because more and more people want what people don't have, right? You have a new Daytona, I have an old Daytona. It's really hard to get, so I've just rendered your Rolex Daytona obsolete. And sometimes vintage Rolex is such a rarity is because history, throughout history, as I said, Rolex was deemed to be one of the most reliable watch manufacturer to make watches. And because when it was first sorry, please, I don't know why it just had a notification. Because when Rolex first started making watches, it was just a reliable tool watch. People didn't view it as luxurious watches or luxury watches. A GMT Master, right? For pilots, they wouldn't care like if they, hit it, around in the cockpit, whatever. And Daytonas, like how many, you will never be able to fathom how many Daytonas were actually destroyed on racetrack because they're using it like a tool, like race car driver. Let's say the car accidentally crashed, the watch can be destroyed in the process as well. So you will never actually be able to fathom how many watches from the old age were destroyed. And if one of 1,000 Rolexes from the 60s were able to make it to this day, is gonna be really rare because we know that it's almost impossible, or as I said, really rare for an old Rolex, actually for every brand, for old watches like this to survive all these crazy events and survive into nowadays era, right? That's like the basis. I feel like that's all the basis of vintage watches, why vintage watches is so sought after. Another thing is that Rolex, while creating watches, they have different prototypes. Oh, my bad. Rolex, when they're creating watches, they have different prototypes. They have different, I'd say a really smart thing they do is that they make the same watches but with maybe different variations of it, and they put it out and they test how the market respond to it. And I remember there's a Submariner, the Sea Dweller and Submariner 2000 or something like that, and then they thought the market is gonna be mistake it with another watch. That's why they changed something, I think. So the idea of putting out watches to test the water, which is really, really smart. But because of that, they have a lot of different version of the same watch. A Rolex Sigma dial, right? A dial with the Sigma symbol. Rare, right? Double red, rare. Great white, not as rare as double red, but still kind of rare, right? Maybe font mistakes, right? So each of these really small things contribute. Each of these really small details combined with the rarity of watches, the rarity of old Rolex watches, made it into why vintage Rolex watches are so expensive. But here's the thing though. All these information I've obtained, all these knowledge I've attained from my research, I feel like one thing that I still couldn't, I feel like I wouldn't be able to know at all is how people actually feel about Rolex and what Rolex means to them, what the word Rolex means to them. Because all these on paper statistics, all these numbers and facts that I can read about, people's sentiment towards the brand is always going to be the most reliable assets for companies to attract buyers, right? As I was watching Bark and Jack talking about Rolex research, right? I was watching Bark and Jack, and and he said it ultimately comes down to how much you relate to the brand. If you relate to the brand a lot, let's say they ask you to pay 50,000 for a watch, and because you relate to it so much, you think it's worth it. And but if you know, some other people, they do not relate to the brand as much, 50,000 for a watch is really expensive, that's why they won't pay it. So ultimately it comes down to how, like, the sentiment of people towards a certain brand. And the more I look into it, as I said, the more I look into why Rolex is Rolex, why vintage Rolex is so difficult to understand. Just like my recent story on Instagram, the more I look into it, the more questions I have, the more conundrums I find towards why do people love vintage Rolex so much, and is anyone lying about the actual number of watches existing in the market? That's why they jacked up the price, so like they can jack up the price so easily, because everyone thought there's only 5 on Earth. It's gonna be like 30 million each, right? Maybe there's actually 200, who knows? And even questions like, would vintage Rolex be so sought after if they were not featured in various big movies? Like, would vintage Rolex just purely based on their quality, purely based on how reliable they are and their design and the technicality of Rolex watches, without the marketing from world leaders in movies, would vintage Rolex still be so sought after? Can the idea of rarity fuel the brand's popularity? And this concludes the first journal entry. I'd say this is like my initial findings of Rolex and trying to understand Rolex. And once again, this is all just my opinion. There's a huge chance that it is wrong, but it's more like I want to document my thought process during it. I want to document how, at least like through my words explaining Rolex, you can see how I feel towards Rolex as well. And that's what I want to achieve here. And thank you guys for staying for so long. It was like almost like 25 minutes, although 27 minutes now. So thank you guys. This is the first journal entry once again, and there are going to be more as I learn more about Rolex and vintage Rolex world. So hope you have a great day. Thanks for staying. Please make sure to follow Gentleman Pursuits on Instagram and YouTube. Subscribe to YouTube and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, whatever you're using to listen to the podcast. Thank you once again. Stay hydrated, stay safe, wear a mask, and I'll see you in the next episode.